There's a specific kind of peace that is not actually peace. It looks like peace. It functions like peace. You describe it to other people using the word peace, and they nod, and the conversation moves on, because from the outside, it is indistinguishable from the real thing. But you know the difference. You know it because you can feel the specific place where it is covering something rather than resolving something. The thing you released, the hope, the dream, the direction, the certainty that your life was moving toward a specific something, did not actually leave. You just stopped carrying it. And there's a difference between a thing being gone and a thing being set down in the dark where you no longer have to look at it. You have been telling yourself that you set it down in faith, that you released it in trust. And sometimes that is true. But today I'm speaking to the ones who set it down because they could not sustain the cost of continuing to carry it. The ones who let go not because they heard me say release it, but because holding on had become too expensive. And they called the relief of stopping faith, because faith was the only name available for what they needed it to be. I know the difference between the release that is faith and the release that is survival. And I am speaking today to the ones who released it to survive. Maybe what you released was a dream about your future that had enough specificity to hurt when it did not materialize. Not a vague aspiration, a particular image, a particular marriage, a particular family, a particular calling lived out in a particular form, a particular door that you believed was yours, and that remained closed long past the point when it made sense to keep standing in front of it. And for a long time, that image was so clear and so present that you organized your decisions around it. You sustained your faith on it. You held it as a navigational truth that gave your present circumstances meaning because it was pointing towards something specific. And then, not all at once, the image began to fade, not because you decided to abandon it, but because every year that passed without evidence of its arrival made it harder to hold it full clarity, and eventually you found yourself describing it in the past tense. The dream I used to have, the direction I used to feel, the certainty I used to carry. Past tense, as if it belonged to someone younger than you, as if the person you are now has grown past it, grown out of it, grown wise enough to stop holding on to something that year after year showed no sign of arriving in the form you expected it to arrive. And the story you told yourself about that release was very reasonable. You said, I am not giving up on God, I am trusting God's plan. I am not losing faith, I am maturing past a version of faith that needed specific outcomes to survive. I am not in grief, I am in acceptance. These things are partially true. Maturity does involve releasing the belief that God is obligated to fulfill your expectations on your timeline, and trust does involve holding space for plans that look different from what you imagined. But there is another possibility that this reasonable story has been working very hard to keep you from having to look at directly. The possibility that what you called acceptance was actually grief that got tired. That what you called maturity was the survival mechanism of a faith that could not afford to keep hoping for something that kept not arriving, that you did not grow past the dream. You endured past the ability to keep waiting for it, and when the waiting became more expensive than the carrying, you set it down. And you named the relief of setting it down peace, because peace was the only word that would let you keep moving. I am not here to reopen the wound. I am here because what you set down is still in my hands. And I need you to know that. I am not saying that every released dream is a faith failure. There are things that I genuinely lead people away from. Directions that were never from me. Visions that originated in ambition rather than calling. Timelines that were constructed around human expectation rather than divine instruction. Some releasing is right. Some releasing is faithfulness. But I am speaking today to the ones who let go of something that was mine. The ones who released a promise I gave them, not because they heard me say let it go, but because they could no longer sustain the cost of continuing to hope for it. They set it down not in peace, but in exhaustion. Not in trust, but in a grief so heavy that releasing it felt like the only option left that would allow them to keep functioning, to keep getting up in the morning, to keep serving, keep working, keep loving the people around them without the weight of a specific unmet longing pulling at everything they did. They released it so they could keep living. And I know that. I see the difference between the one who releases a dream in obedience and the one who releases it in collapse. And I am speaking today to the one who released it in collapse, the one who set it down in the dark. Because what you set down in the dark is still there, and it is still mine, and I am still holding it. And here is what I need you to know, not as comfort, not as the kind of reassurance that sounds beautiful in a moment and then evaporates when you return to ordinary life, but as the most accurate description of what has actually been happening during the time you have been carrying this in the dark, in the past tense, in the language of what used to be. I have not let go. Whatever you released, whatever you set down because you could no longer sustain the cost of carrying it, I have been holding it. My grip on what I have spoken over your life does not depend on your grip on the promise. My commitment to what I have begun in you does not expire when your ability to keep believing runs out. You released it to survive. I held it because I am the one who gave it. That is not a metaphor. It is the most consistent pattern across the entire history of my relationship with human beings. Every time a person in my story could no longer carry what they were carrying, every time exhaustion or fear or grief or the sheer accumulation of too many years of too little visible evidence caused the one who continued to hold it. Let me show you what that looks like, because I am not asking you to take my word for it. I am going to show you 6 people whose stories have been preserved for exactly this moment. I am the God who holds what human hands release. This is not a new capacity I developed in response to human frailty. It is not a contingency plan I activated when the people in my story proved too weak to maintain their grip on what I had given them. This is fundamental to who I am. It is what I have always done. From the beginning of my relationship with human beings, from the moment I first began speaking specific words of calling and promise and direction over specific lives, the pattern has been the same. I speak it, they receive it, they carry it for a time, and then something happens, sometimes failure, sometimes fear, sometimes nothing more dramatic than the simple accumulation of years without visible evidence of what was promised. And I hold it. Hannah's prayer was answered not in the year it was prayed, but in the year I had chosen before she prayed it. Joseph's calling survived the pit and the prison, and a cupbearer who forgot his name for 2 full years. Moses' commission survived 40 years of apparent irrelevance in the wilderness of Midian and waited in a burning bush on the far side of the desert until he came close enough to hear his name. Elijah's purpose survived the juniper tree and the prayer to die. Simeon's promise survived decades of ordinary days and the patient accumulation of years that no one could count. The woman who had spent everything she had on physicians, her healing was waiting in the hem of a garment she reached for in secret. I hold what human hands release. That is what I am. The things I hold do not expire. This is the truth I need to build in you today, not as a theological concept added to a list of things you affirm when you are in a good season, but as a living operative reality that changes the way you read your own story from this point forward. The promise I spoke over your life, the calling I placed in you, the direction I gave you, the dream I planted in you that arrived with the specific gravity of divine origin, rather than the lightness of personal ambition. That thing does not have an expiration date. It does not have a timeline after which I give it to someone more consistent. It does not get transferred to a more faithful candidate when you stop performing at the level of belief required to maintain it. It waits. It remains. It persists in my hands through every season in which your hands are too exhausted or too grieved or too guarded to hold it. The expiration model, the belief that a promise can become void through delay, through failure, through the simple passage of too much time without visible movement, is not a theological truth. It is what fatigue tells. It is what grief teaches. It is the conclusion that every rational mind in every prolonged wilderness reaches eventually, and it is wrong. And I have come today to dismantle it with 6 stories. 6 people who released what I had given them. 6 people in whose hands my promise appeared to have died. And 6 accounts of what I was doing the entire time they could not see me working. Listen carefully. What I hold does not expire. And I have been holding something that belongs to you. There is a woman in the first book of Samuel whose story begins with a very quiet devastation. Her name is Hannah. She was the wife of a man named Elkanah, and Elkanah loved her. The text makes this explicit, which is itself notable in the context of ancient household arrangements that were often organized more around economic and social function than emotional attachment. He loved her. He gave her a double portion, and she had no children. The other wife, Peninnah, had children. And every year, the text uses the phrase year after year, which is the most precise description of sustained suffering available in narrative form. Peninnah would provoke Hannah, irritate her, make her weep, because the Lord had closed Hannah's womb. Year after year, not once in a moment of cruelty that passed. Year after year, the same provocation, the same wound reopened in the same season, at the same place, in the same context of worship and communal gathering that should have been the place of her greatest consolation. Hannah carried the weight of barrenness in a culture where children were the primary visible evidence of divine favor, where a woman's worth was substantially constituted by her fruitfulness. She was loved by her husband. She had provision, and she had nothing that the culture around her recognized as the evidence of God's blessing. Year after year, the longing without the answer, the prayer without the fulfillment, the empty place that every annual journey to Shiloh managed to make feel larger rather than smaller. Every year they went up to Shiloh to worship and to sacrifice to the Lord of hosts, and every year at the place of worship, the very place where the presence of God was supposed to be most tangibly accessible, Hannah's grief intensified rather than resolved. She wept and would not eat, and Elkanah, her husband, said to her, "Hannah, why do you weep? And why do you not eat? And why is your heart sad? Am I not more to you than 10 sons?" It is one of the most well-meaning and most insufficient things said anywhere in Scripture. He was trying to help. He was offering himself as evidence of sufficiency, and he was not wrong about his love. But the specific form of Hannah's longing was not something his love could fill. The longing for a child, the longing for the thing God had not yet given, the thing that year after year remained absent while other women around her received it, was not a longing that the presence of a loving husband could satisfy, however real and genuine that love was. And his question, gentle as it was, carried inside it the implicit suggestion that she should be satisfied, that what she had been given should be enough, that her grief was somehow a misreading of her blessings. And Hannah carried the grief anyway. She did not perform resolution she did not feel. She went to the place where the Lord was, and she poured it out. She did not manage it or suppress it or reshape it into something more spiritually presentable. She poured it out exactly as it was. She was praying in her heart. Only her lips moved. Her voice was not heard. She was not making a scene. She was not performing her grief for an audience. She was in the depths of a conversation that was entirely between her and the Lord, expressed in a register so interior that it had had no audible sound, only the movement of lips that could not contain what was being said without form. And Eli the priest saw her lips moving and assumed she was drunk and said to her, "How long will you go on being drunk? Put away your wine." She was misread at the place of worship by the man responsible for the place of worship, the very person who should have been most capable of recognizing the posture of desperate, private, body-engaged prayer. Read it as intoxication. And Hannah did not withdraw into offense. She did not say, "I came here in my most vulnerable state and was judged by the person who was supposed to receive me." She explained, "I am a woman troubled in spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have been pouring out my soul before the Lord. Do not regard your servant as a worthless woman, for all along I have been speaking out of my great anxiety and vexation." And Eli answered, "Go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition that you have made to him." And she went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad. Before anything had visibly changed, before she was pregnant, before any external evidence of answered prayer existed, after a conversation with a priest who had misread her, her face was no longer sad. The peace came before the answer. And the Lord remembered Hannah. 3 words. In all the narrative economy of the Hebrew text, 3 words describe the turning point of one woman's story, and through her, the turning point of an entire nation. Because the child given to Hannah became Samuel, the last of the judges, the first of the great prophets, the one who would anoint both Saul and David, the one whose life marked the hinge between one era of Israel's history and the next. The Lord remembered Hannah. The verb used here in the Hebrew carries the weight of intentional, purposeful, deliberate enactment, not the recovery of something that had slipped from attention, but the activation of something that had always been held. God had not forgotten Hannah. He had been holding her story, holding her longing, holding the child that would be given to her for the moment he had always known. And when that moment arrived, the text says simply, "In due time Hannah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Samuel. For she said, I have asked for him from the Lord." And when she brought the boy to Eli, she said, "For this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted me my petition that I made to him." And then Hannah prayed. One of the most theologically dense songs of praise in the entire Old Testament. She prayed about mighty warriors falling and the weak being raised, about the barren bearing 7. She prophesied far beyond the boundaries of her own experience, because the thing I had been holding for her was not just a child. It was a testimony, and the testimony was always meant to be spoken aloud, in her voice, from her specific history, to everyone who would come after her. I want you to stay for a moment with the detail that Hannah's face was no longer sad before anything visibly changed. She went to Shiloh still barren. She prayed in her grief. She was misunderstood by the priest. She explained herself. She received a blessing from a priest whose understanding of the moment was incomplete, and she went back and ate, and her face was no longer sad. The answer had not arrived. The womb had not yet opened. Samuel had not yet been conceived. But something had shifted in Hannah's interior, not because the circumstances had changed, but because the conversation with me, however imperfect the human intermediary, had produced a different relationship to the waiting. She had poured herself out. She had been emptied of what she had been carrying alone in the interior, in the form of grief that had no adequate language and no adequate audience until she brought it to me directly. And in that emptying, something settled. The peace that precedes the answer is not pretending the answer has arrived. It is not managed emotions or positive thinking or a spiritual technique for feeling better before the evidence changes. It is what happens when a grief that has been carried alone is finally poured out completely, when the holding it quietly gives way to bringing it to me in the full, unadorned weight of what it actually is. I am inviting you to do what Hannah did. Come to the place where I am. Pour it out. Whatever it looks like from the outside, however it is misread by the people around you, bring it in the form it actually takes, and receive the peace that comes not from the answer arriving but from the weight finally being shared. Hannah's story is also the story of what happens when you bring your grief to me in the specific form it actually takes, rather than the form you believe is spiritually acceptable. She did not bring a composed, orderly petition. She brought weeping in a silence so deep that only her lips moved. She brought the kind of prayer that gets mistaken for dysfunction by people watching from the outside. The kind of prayer that has no words, only the physical evidence of something enormous being carried somewhere that cannot contain it any longer. And that prayer, that unpolished, unperformed, body-engaged, silent-voiced prayer, and what I gave back was a son who changed the trajectory of Israel. The form your prayer takes matters less than the honesty with which you bring it. Bring it as it is, whatever it looks like, whatever register it arrives in, silence or weeping, or the kind of language that barely qualifies as language. Bring the actual thing, not the presentable version of it. And now I want to tell you about a man whose story begins with a coat of many colors and ends at the right hand of Pharaoh. And between those 2 points runs one of the most sustained examples anywhere in Scripture of a promise surviving every condition that should have destroyed it. Because Hannah's story is about what happens when barrenness finally gives way. And this next story is about what happens when the promise is tested not over years, but over a specific accumulation of catastrophes, each one arriving before the previous one has had time to be fully processed. Joseph was 17 years old when his brothers stripped him of his coat, the coat of many colors that his father had given him as a sign of favor, and threw him into a pit. The text is precise about the condition of the pit. It was empty. There was no water in it, not a well that could sustain life. Empty cistern, a dry hole in the ground with no possibility of sustaining anything that needed water to survive. His brothers sat down to eat bread while Joseph was in the pit. The text notes the detail specifically. They sat down to eat while he was below them in the dry cistern. And they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. And they sold him for 20 pieces of silver. Joseph arrived in Egypt as a slave. The specific dreams he had been given, the dreams of sheaves bowing, of sun and moon and 11 stars making obeisance to him, did not cease to be true when he arrived in Egypt in chain. What I had spoken over Joseph's life did not become void at the bottom of the pit. But from inside the pit, there was no visible path from where he was to where the dream had pointed. From inside the pit, the dream was exactly the kind of thing you let go of in order to survive, because you cannot afford to keep holding a dream about being the one everyone bows to when you are at the bottom of an empty cistern being sold for 20 pieces of silver. The cost of holding it is too high. So you set it down, and I hold it for you. Joseph was bought by Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, and the Lord was with Joseph. That phrase, "the Lord was with Joseph," appears in this section of the narrative multiple times, and each repetition is doing significant theological work. Not, "the Lord was with Joseph when things were going well." Not, "the Lord was with Joseph during seasons of visible favor and prosperity." The Lord was with Joseph in Potiphar's house, and the text says that everything Joseph did prospered, that Potiphar saw that the Lord was with him and made him overseer of his house. And then Potiphar's wife. The daily pressure, the persistent false advance, and then the false accusation when Joseph refused her. And the prison. And the text says again, in the prison, a second time, the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. The same phrase, in the prison. The divine presence was not a reward for favorable circumstances. It was not withdrawn when the circumstances turned catastrophic through no fault of his own. The same God who made Potiphar's house prosper was in the prison with Joseph. The same presence that was with him in the coat was with him in the chains. This is one of the most important things I need you to hold from this story. My presence in the hard place is not evidence that I have forgotten the promise. It is evidence that I am still in the story, even in the chapter that bears no visible resemblance to the promise I gave. In the prison, Joseph interpreted the dreams of two of Pharaoh's officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. He said to the cupbearer, "When it goes well with you, remember me to Pharaoh and please mention me to him, and so get me out of this place. For I was indeed stolen out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also I've done nothing that they should put me into the pit." And it went well with the cupbearer. He was restored to his position, and yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. 2 full years passed, 24 months during which Joseph remained in the prison, during which the man who had the capacity to mention his name to Pharaoh chose not to, not from malice but from the ordinary human capacity for convenient forgetting when one's own comfort has been restored. 2 full years of silence, and then Pharaoh dreamed, and none of his magicians or wise men could interpret the dream. And the cupbearer remembered his offense. "I remember my offenses today," he said. And he told Pharaoh about Joseph. And Joseph was brought out of the prison and stood before Pharaoh. The text gives his age at this moment. Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh. He had been 17 when his brothers threw him into the pit. 13 years. And in those 13 years, the promise did not stop being true. The dream did not stop being the dream. What I had spoken over Joseph's life did not become void because the path to its fulfillment ran through a pit and a prison and 2 years of a cupbearer's convenient forgetting. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Can we find a man like this in whom is the Spirit of God?" And Pharaoh set Joseph over all the land of Egypt, second only to Pharaoh himself. The man who had been in a pit at 17 stood at the right hand of Pharaoh at 30. The man whose brothers had calculated what profit there was in saving his life became the man through whom the lives of nations were saved during 7 years of famine. And when his brothers came to Egypt during the famine, unrecognizing, desperate, reduced by hunger to dependence on the very brother they had sold, and Joseph revealed himself to them. His words are among the most theologically concentrated in all of Scripture. Do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. What the enemy intended as destruction, I was using as positioning. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Joseph could see the intention only from the vantage point of the fulfillment. From inside the pit, the intention was invisible. From inside the prison, the intention was invisible. From inside the 2 years of the cupbearer's forgetting, the intention was invisible. But the intention was always there, underneath every chapter that looked like it had ended the story, working through every catastrophe that appeared to be a conclusive evidence of abandoned promise. The thread that I was holding ran through all of it, from the pit to the palace, and it never broke. Joseph's story is the story of a promise that survived conditions that should have destroyed it, not because Joseph's faith was perfect throughout, not because he never struggled or despaired, not because he maintained unbroken confidence in the dream through the pit and the prison and the years of the cupbearer's forgetting, but because the promise belonged to me. And the things that belong to me do not die in pits. They do not expire in prisons. They do not become void when the people assigned to remember fail to remember. The cupbearer forgot Joseph. Human memory failed exactly when it was most needed. But I did not forget Joseph. And at the moment I had always known, the moment of Pharaoh's dream, the moment the interpretive gift I had given Joseph was needed in the one location in the ancient world where it could accomplish what I intended, I connected the threads. The pit connected to the prison, connected to the cupbearer, connected to Pharaoh's dream, connected to the throne. Joseph could not see the thread from inside any single chapter. He could only see where he was. But I could see the whole thread from beginning to end, and I held it. Through every chapter that looked like it had severed it, the thread was always there. And what I held for Joseph, across 13 years and every condition that should have ended it, is what I am holding for you. I can see the whole thread from where you are now to where I am taking you. You cannot see it yet, but the thread is there, and I have not let go. And there is something important to understand about how I hold it. The thread does not fray with time. Delay does not weaken what I am carrying for you. The specific catastrophes that passed through Joseph's story, the pit, the slavery, the false accusation, the prison, the 2 years of a cupbearer's convenient forgetting, none of them created a permanent break in the line I was holding. Each of them looked, from inside that specific chapter, like the place where the thread should have ended, like the evidence that the dream was dead. And from where I stand, from the vantage point that sees every chapter simultaneously, each of them was a bend in the thread, not a break in it. The thread bends around suffering. It bends around false accusation. It bends around the years when every human who was positioned to help has forgotten your name. But the thread does not break. And what I hold for you, through whatever specific accumulation of pits and prisons and years of apparent forgetting your particular story has gathered, that thread has not broken. The bend is not the break. The silence of a season is not the silence of a God who has released what he once spoke. I have not released it, and I have not let go. Moses was born into a death sentence. The Pharaoh who did not know Joseph had issued a decree that every son born to the Hebrew people was to be thrown into the Nile. His mother hid him for 3 months, and when she could no longer hide him, she took a basket of papyrus, covered it with tar and pitch, placed the child inside, and set it among the reeds at the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen, and Pharaoh's daughter came down to bathe at the river, and she saw the basket among the reeds, and she sent her servant to bring it. And when she opened it, she saw the child, and the baby was crying, and she took pity on him. She said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." And the baby's sister stepped forward and said, "Shall I go and call you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" And Pharaoh's daughter said, "Go." And the girl went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter paid the child's own mother to nurse her own son. Moses grew up as the son of Pharaoh's daughter, educated in all the wisdom of Egypt, powerful in words and deeds. The child whose death was ordered by Pharaoh was raised inside Pharaoh's own household. The first chapter of his life was the most unlikely story of preservation in the ancient world. A Hebrew infant born under an edict of death, hidden in a basket, discovered by the one person whose status was high enough to override the edict, and nursed back to that household by his own mother at Egypt's expense. Then the second chapter arrived. Moses saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew. He looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. He believed this act, or perhaps only hoped, in the complicated way that action and hope are sometimes indistinguishable in the moment, that it would be understood as solidarity, as the beginning of something. The next day, when two Hebrews were fighting, he intervened, and one of them said, "Who made you a ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?" And Moses was afraid, and Pharaoh sought to kill him. And Moses fled from Pharaoh and stayed in the land of Midian. He sat down by a well. He met Jethro's daughters. He married Zipporah, and he tended the flock of his father-in-law Jethro for 40 years. 40 years. The man educated in all the wisdom of Egypt. The man who had believed, or who had at least acted as though he believed, that he was positioned to do something significant for his people. Now a shepherd. For 40 years. In the wilderness of Midian. The wilderness was not a sabbatical. It was not a season of preparation that felt like preparation. It was the place where the plan, as far as Moses could tell, had entirely collapsed. He had tried to be the deliverer. He had failed. He had killed a man. He had been rejected by the very people he was trying to help. He had fled. And then, 40 years with sheep in the wilderness, far from Egypt, far from his people, far from anything that resembled the life he had believed himself called to. By any reasonable assessment, the calling was over. Moses led the flock to the far side of the wilderness. The text uses that specific phrase, the far side, suggesting distance from the ordinary and familiar, and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And there the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, "I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned." When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called to him from within the bush, "Moses, Moses." And he said, "Here I am." The encounter required Moses' noticing. The bush was burning before Moses arrived, but the voice came when he turned aside. He could have kept walking. He could have explained the anomaly to himself and continued his day. He turned aside, and the voice of God, which had been silent throughout the 40 years in Midian, spoke into the moment of turning. And what God said first was not an instruction. What God said first was an account of what he had been doing during the years Moses believed the plan had completely collapsed. "I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings. I have come down to deliver them." The tense of those sentences matters. I have seen. I have heard. I know. These are not new beginnings. They are descriptions of completed, ongoing action. I have been seeing. I have been hearing. I have been knowing. The 40 years in Midian were not a gap in my attention. They were a gap in Moses' visibility of what I was doing. The plan was not on hold. I was preparing the moment. Moses raised 5 objections to the commission. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? What if they do not believe me or listen to me? I'm not eloquent. I have never been eloquent. I am slow of speech and tongue. Please send someone else. Each of these objections is not the objection of someone who has never tried. It is the objection of someone who has tried and failed in the specific way that teaches you what you are incapable of. Who am I that I should go? This is the question of a man who once believed he was the one who should go, who acted on that belief, and who failed catastrophically and spent 40 years in a wilderness living with the specific memory of that failure. What if they do not believe me? This is the question of a man whose previous act of conviction was immediately rejected by the very people he was trying to help. I am slow of speech. This is a man who has had 40 years to reckon with his own limitations in the quiet of the wilderness, and who is being asked to go back to the very place where those limitations were exposed. Every objection was real, and my answer to every single one of them was not a refutation of the objection. My answer was, I will be with you. Not, you are more capable than you think. Not, your previous failure does not define your future capacity. I will be with you. That was the answer, and that is always the answer. The call comes to those who have given up on being called, and my response to every reason you have for why you cannot be the one is the same thing I said to Moses. I will be with you. That is enough. That has always been enough. It was enough for Moses, who went back to Egypt with nothing but a staff and the promise of a presence he could not see, but had been told was there. It was enough for the first step back across the wilderness he had just spent 40 years in. It is enough for you, for the specific return I am calling you to, for the direction I am turning you back toward, for the attempt I am asking you to make at something you already tried and that failed in the way that taught you what you are not capable of on your own. My answer to your list of reasons you cannot do this is not a counter-argument or a revised assessment of your capacity. It is the same sentence I gave Moses in front of a burning bush on the far side of the wilderness. I will be with you. And the one who says that is not offering companionship as a consolation for a calling you cannot fulfill. The calling is possible because I am the one accompanying it. The capacity is mine. The commission is mine. The timing is mine. Your part is to go when I say go, and I will be with you. I want you to understand the specific context of Elijah's most desperate moment, because it does not happen in a season of failure or spiritual dryness. It happens immediately after one of the greatest moments of visible divine power recorded anywhere in Scripture. The chapter before the juniper tree is Mount Carmel. Elijah had challenged 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah to a contest of altars, a direct, public, irreversible confrontation between the God of Israel and the gods of Jezebel's court. He had watched them call on Baal from morning until noon and received nothing. He had mocked them. He had then repaired the broken altar of the Lord with 12 stones, 12, one for each tribe of a divided nation, and dug a trench around it, and arranged the wood and the bull, and then poured 12 large jars of water over the sacrifice, until the water ran around the altar and filled the trench. He doused what was supposed to burn with the very substance that prevents burning, and he prayed a single, brief, theologically precise prayer, and fire fell from heaven. The fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering and the wood and the stones and the dust, and licked up the water that was in the trench. The stones. The fire consumed the stones. And then he prayed 7 times for rain, and the rain came, and Ahab rode his chariot through the rain. Total victory. Complete. And then Jezebel sent a messenger. So let the gods do to me, and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by tomorrow. And Elijah, the man who had just watched fire consume stones, was afraid. He ran. The prophet who had called fire from heaven. He ran a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a juniper tree, a broom tree at the edge of the desert, and he asked that he might die. He said, "It is enough, Lord. Take my life, for I am no better than my fathers." And he lay down under the juniper tree and slept. I need you to receive the full weight of this scene, because the temptation is to move past it quickly, to rush to the angel and the food and the journey to Horeb, and the still small voice. The temptation is to treat the juniper tree as a brief transitional low point before the real action. But the prophet who had just watched fire fall from heaven was lying in the wilderness, asking to die. Not because the power of God had proven insufficient, not because the victory on Carmel had been reversed, but because the specific combination of extraordinary spiritual expenditure, the terror of a very specific and personal death threat, and the exhaustion of carrying a prophetic calling in near total isolation. All of these produced in Elijah a collapse that no amount of theological knowledge about what had just happened on Carmel could prevent. The fire falls on a Monday and the broom tree is the destination by the end of the week. Great spiritual victories do not immunize against great spiritual collapses. And Elijah, exhausted and afraid and done with the weight of it, he was not rebuked. He was not corrected. He was not given a speech about what he had accomplished and why that should sustain him. He was touched. An angel touched him and said, "Arise and eat." He looked, and there at his head was a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. And he ate and drank and lay down again. And the angel of the Lord came a second time and touched him and said, "Arise and eat, for the journey is too great for you. The journey is too great for you." I want you to stay with that sentence for a long moment, because it is one of the most tender things spoken anywhere in the entirety of Scripture. Not, "You are too weak." Not, "Your faith has failed, and this is the consequence." Not, "Where is the man who stood on Carmel?" The journey is too great for you. God named the weight of what Elijah was carrying, named it as genuinely heavy, genuinely excessive for any single human being to carry alone, and then provided for the body before addressing anything else. He ate and drank and rose and went, in the strength of that food, 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mountain of God. And there, at the mountain, he went into a cave and lodged there. And the word of the Lord came to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And Elijah answered with everything: his zeal, his isolation, his perception that he was the last one standing, his exhaustion, his grief. He told me everything. And I asked him to stand on the mountain before the Lord. And the great wind came, and the earthquake, and the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice. And in the whisper, the same question: "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And then, "Go." The work was not finished. The story was not over. The juniper tree was not the last chapter. I told Elijah about the 7,000 who had not bowed the knee to Baal after I had fed him, after I had accompanied him, after I had asked his question twice and heard his answer in full, after the wind and the earthquake and the fire and the whisper. Only then, after all of that, did I tell him, "You are not alone. There are 7,000 in Israel who have not bowed the knee." I think about the specific order of those events often, because the order matters more than the content. God did not begin with the correction of Elijah's theology, did not lead with information about the 7,000 who would have been concrete evidence that his self-perception was inaccurate, did not start with, "Actually, your counting is wrong. There are 7,000 more faithful people than you think." God began with food, with water, with touch, with the acknowledgement, "The journey is too great for you," that the weight was genuinely heavy. That is how I meet exhaustion. Not with information, but with presence. Not with correction, but with care. And when the care had done its work, when Elijah had eaten and rested and traveled and had his question asked twice and had spoken the full weight of what he was carrying into the encounter on the mountain, then came the instruction to go. Then came the information about the 7,000. Then came the redirection. That was the order. And the order was not accidental. I do not begin with instruction when what is needed is provision. I feed before I speak. I restore before I redirect. The provision is part of the message. And the message is, the journey is too great, and I know it, and I am meeting you here. Elijah's story carries a specific word for the one who has just come through a season of extraordinary spiritual output and finds themselves in a wilderness asking for the journey to be over. Not in rebellion, not in theological collapse, in the specific exhaustion of someone who gave everything, who showed up fully, who faced what they faced, who stood on the mountain when standing was required, and then found themselves with nothing left. The word is this: I know the weight of what you carry. I know what it costs to function at the level of calling when the calling is large and the opposition is specific and personal and the support is scarcer than the demand. I know the particular collapse that follows the particular victory, when the adrenaline of the critical moment recedes, and what is left is the ongoing reality of a battle that did not end just because one day went extraordinarily well. I know that the one who calls fire on Monday can be under a broom tree by Friday, and my response to the broom tree is not, "Get up, the work is not finished." My response is, "Arise and eat." The work will be addressed. The instruction will come. The direction will be given. But first, arise and eat. First, the care of this specific person in this specific moment of this specific exhaustion. First, presence. First, the touch of the angel who says, "The journey is too great for you," and then does something about it before saying anything else. You are not being rebuked for being under the juniper tree. You are not failing the test of the juniper tree. You are being met there. Exactly there. I know where you are. The pattern in Elijah's story is the pattern of my consistent response to human exhaustion. I provide before I instruct. I restore before I redirect. I name the weight. The journey is too great for you before I ask anything of you. This pattern matters because many of you have been in a season that resembles the wilderness after Carmel. A season that followed a significant expenditure of faith, that came after you gave something costly, that arrived in the aftermath of a moment when everything seemed to work exactly as it was supposed to. And then the threat came and the adrenaline dissipated, and what remained was an exhaustion that no amount of reviewing what God had done on the mountain could resolve. And you have been under the juniper tree, not in active rebellion, not in theological crisis, in the specific exhaustion of someone who poured themselves out completely and has nothing left to pour. And the message I am giving you today is not, "Get up, there is more work to do." The message is, "Arise and eat." Receive what I am providing in this moment. These words, this presence, this encounter that did not arrive in your day by accident. Eat, die, and then rest. And then, when the provision has done its work, when the restoration has prepared the way for the next instruction, then I will speak the direction. Then I will tell you about the 7,000. Then I will say go. But first, arise and eat. The direction is coming. The instruction is coming. The work is not finished. But today, I am feeding you. And feeding you is part of the work. There is a man named Simeon in the 2nd chapter of Luke's Gospel. He is described in a small number of words that contain an entire life, righteous and devout. He was waiting. The text uses the specific phrase, waiting for the consolation of Israel, and the Holy Spirit was upon him. And it had been revealed to him by the Holy Spirit that he would not see death before he had seen the Lord's Christ. A man who had been given a promise with no timeline. Not, "You will see the Messiah by your 40th birthday." Not, "The Lord's Christ will come before the end of this decade." Not, "You will live to see a sign." Simply, "You will not die before you have seen my Christ." No date, no description of the form the fulfillment would take, no indication of how long the waiting would extend, just the promise, held by a man who was, by the internal logic of the story, old enough that the promise was one of the primary features of how he understood his own continued presence in the world. He had lived past what many people around him had lived to see, and he was still waiting. He had watched for years and years and years for the evidence of the promise's arrival, and had not seen it arrive in any of the forms the tradition expected. And one day, an ordinary day, no advance announcement, no spectacular sign in the temple courts, the Spirit led him in. The same Spirit who had given him the promise initiated the movement on the specific day of the fulfillment. Simeon responded, and he came in. And into the ordinary corridor of the temple walked a young couple from Galilee. They were not wealthy. The text notes that they brought 2 turtle doves as their offering, which was the provision specified in the law for those who could not afford a lamb. They were poor. They were bringing an infant for the rites of purification and presentation, an entirely ordinary event. The temple saw dozens of these presentations every week. There was nothing about the external appearance of this family that would have drawn any particular attention. A young woman, a man, a baby, the offering of the poor. And Simeon saw them come in, and he knew the Spirit who had led him into the temple was the same Spirit who had given him the promise, and the Spirit identified what his eyes were seeing before his reasoning could have reached the same conclusion. And Simeon took the baby up in his arms. He held the Lord's Christ in the arms that had been waiting a lifetime for this. And he blessed God and said, "Lord, now you are letting your servant depart in peace according to your word. For my eyes have seen your salvation that you have prepared in the presence of all peoples, a light for revelation to the Gentiles and for glory to your people Israel." He had waited a lifetime for one moment, and the moment arrived in a form that nothing in his tradition had prepared him to expect. Poor parents, a common presentation, a baby in the arms of a woman whose offering was 2 birds. But the promise was being fulfilled in the exact form I had always intended, and he recognized it, because the Spirit who gave the promise was the Spirit who said, "Now." Notice the 3 words Simeon spoke when he took the baby in his arms, according to your word. He had not let go of the word. Through however many years, through however many seasons that were not the season, through however many ordinary days in the temple that were not the day, through whatever doubts arrived in the long corridor between the promise given and the promise fulfilled, he had held the word. He had not demanded a timeline. He had not manufactured a fulfillment that approximately resembled what he had been promised. He had not decided at some point that the word had expired or been revised or was probably meant as a spiritual metaphor rather than a literal promise about a literal encounter in a literal place. He had held it according to your word. And when the day came, the specific, unannounced, ordinary-looking day that turned out to be the day, he was in the temple. He was present. He was led by the Spirit into the place of the fulfillment, and he received it. And he said, "Now dismiss your servant in peace." He was ready. He had seen what he had been waiting to see, and what he saw was a baby in the arms of a poor young woman from Galilee, not a military deliverer arriving in triumph, not a royal figure processing through the gates with a retinue. A baby in the arms of poverty on an unremarkable morning, fulfilled in the exact way I had always intended, which bore no resemblance to what any tradition had predicted. The promise was true. The form of the fulfillment was always mine to determine, not Simeon's, not the traditions, mine. Simeon's story carries a specific word for those of you who have been holding a promise for a very long time, longer than you anticipated when you first received it, longer than makes sense to the people around you who are wondering when you are going to be realistic about it, longer than feels reasonable given the absence of any visible movement toward its fulfillment. The word is this: hold it. Hold it the way Simeon held it, not by demanding evidence on your schedule, not by manufacturing a fulfillment that approximately matches what you were promised, not by deciding at some point that the word was probably meant differently than you understood it when it was given. Hold it according to my word, and watch for the Spirit's leading, not the spectacular announcement, not the visible sign that today is definitively the day, but the quiet internal movement that says, "Go in today," not because anything external indicates this is the moment, but because the Spirit who gave you the promise is the same Spirit who will lead you to the moment of its fulfillment when the time has come. Your part is to hold the word and to go when the Spirit moves. My part is the timing and the form of the fulfillment, and the form may look nothing like what you expected. It may arrive in the arms of poverty on an ordinary day, in a moment that appears entirely unremarkable to everyone else in the corridor. But you will know, because the same Spirit who has been holding the promise with you will say, "This is the moment." And you will take it up, and you will say, "According to your word," and it will be true. This is the pattern that Simeon's story establishes for everyone who has been given a specific promise and is living in the long corridor between the receiving of the word and the day of its fulfillment. The corridor is real. The corridor is often longer than any reasonable expectation suggested when you first received the word. And in the corridor, the primary instruction is not to manufacture the fulfillment or to revise the promise into something more achievable. The primary instruction is to hold it and to be present in the place the Spirit calls you to, because the fulfillment arrives in an ordinary moment, through an ordinary door, in the arms of people who appear unremarkable to everyone else in the corridor, but the same Spirit who gave you the word will say, "Now, this is the moment, this is the one," and you will know. Hold the word. Watch for the leading. It will come. There is a woman in the 5th chapter of Mark's Gospel who had had a discharge of blood for 12 years. The text gives her story in 4 sentences that carry the weight of an entire life. She had suffered much under many physicians. She had spent all that she had. She was no better, but rather grew worse. 12 years. Not a difficult season, not a temporary setback that required patience and faith while it resolved itself. 12 years of a condition that, under Jewish law, made her ceremonially unclean, which meant that anyone she touched became unclean, which meant she was untouchable, which meant isolation from community, from worship, from the ordinary physical contact that constitutes a human life. 12 years of being unable to enter the synagogue as a full and equal participant. 12 years of being kept at a distance by the people around her, not from cruelty in most cases, but from the law, which made touching her a contamination, and she had tried everything available to her, many physicians. She had spent all that she had, every resource she possessed, pursuing the healing that these physicians could not provide. And the result of all that investment and all those attempts over all those years was that she was not better. She was worse. By every available measure, the situation was deteriorating. The resources were gone. The options were exhausted. And the condition that had defined her social existence for 12 years showed no sign of resolution through any means she had yet been able to access. She heard about Jesus. That sentence is important because she was in no condition, socially or legally, to be in a crowd. She was unclean. Pressing through a crowd would make everyone she touched unclean. She should not have been there. But she heard. Something reached her in her isolation. Some report, some testimony, some account of what had been happening in the region, and she came. She came up behind him in the crowd. Not in front, not demanding audience, not presenting her case in a way that required a formal response. From behind, quietly, she pressed through the crowd and she touched his garment. The hem, the very edge of the outermost layer of what he was wearing. She had said to herself, "If I touch even his garments, I will be made well." Not, "If I can secure his attention." Not, "If I can make my case compellingly enough that he chooses to respond." If I can just reach the edge of what he is wearing. She reduced the scope of her request to the absolute minimum possible. Not the man, not his hand, not his face, not even his full garment. The edge, the hem, the outermost border of what he wore. She reached for that from behind, quietly, without announcing herself, without making herself visible. And immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. 12 years ended in the reaching, in the secret, quiet, minimum possible from behind reaching of a woman who had spent everything she had and found nothing until she reached for the hem of my garment. And Jesus, perceiving in himself that power had gone out from him, immediately turned about in the crowd and said, his disciples said, "You see the crowd pressing around you, and yet you say, 'Who touched me?'" The question seemed logistically absurd. Many people were pressing against him in that crowd. But he turned. He looked. He waited. And the woman, knowing what had happened to her, knowing in the specific certainty of her own healed body that the 12 years were over, came in fear and trembling and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. Not a managed version. Not a summary that left out the embarrassing parts. The whole truth. 12 years, the physicians, all that she had spent, the growing worse, the hearing about Jesus, the pressing through the crowd from behind, the touching of the hem, the immediate healing, everything. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." Daughter, not healed woman, not formerly unclean woman, not woman with the 12-year condition that has now been resolved. Daughter turned to He named her identity before he named her condition. He gave her a relational word, not a medical word, not a legal word, not a status word, before he confirmed the healing that had already happened in the reaching. She came with a condition. She left with an identity. He stopped the entire movement of that day. The crowd, the journey to Jairus' house, everything. To give her not just the physical healing which had already occurred, but the public restoration that completed it. Go in peace. Both words, both gifts, the peace and the going. The woman with the issue of blood did not make a formal request. She did not present her case. She did not secure an audience. She pressed through a crowd she should not have been in and reached from behind for the edge of what I was wearing. And that reaching, secret, quiet, minimum possible, from behind, was enough to draw power from the source of all healing. I need you to hear this for your own life and your own situation. The minimum possible reaching is enough. If you have spent everything on other attempts, if you have been through the physicians of this world, whatever form they have taken in your specific situation, whatever strategies or resources or human capacities you have invested in trying to resolve what is not resolved, and you have nothing left to spend and no improvement to report. If the condition has been present for 12 years and is worse rather than better, if all you have left is the willingness to reach from behind quietly, without announcing yourself, for the edge of what I am wearing, that reaching is enough. It does not have to be bold. It does not have to be performed in the correct form. It does not have to be observed or validated or understood by anyone watching. It just has to be toward me. Power goes out when you reach. The flow stops when you touch. And when I turn and ask who reached, come forward. Tell me the whole truth, not the managed version, not the spiritually presentable version, the whole truth. 12 years, all that you spent, growing worse, pressing through, reaching from behind. Tell me all of it, and I will name you, not by your condition, by who you are to me, daughter, tortuga, son, the one I see when I turn. And I want to tell you something about the turning. When I turned in that crowd, it was not because the power going out surprised me. I felt it go. But I turned because the transaction that was happening needed to be completed in the open, not in secret, not in the anonymous dark of a crowd, not in the form of a healing received and then retreated from as if it were something to be ashamed of. The woman came in secret because she had been living in shame for 12 years. She reached from behind because approaching directly had not been available to her. And I honored the reaching exactly as it arrived. The healing happened in the secret, in the crowd, in the from behind. And then I turned, not to expose her, not to correct her method, but to complete what had begun privately in a way that restored her publicly. Because healing without restoration is not the full gift. She needed to be named. She needed to hear daughter from my mouth, in front of the crowd, in the place where the shame had kept her. And that is what I gave her, the healing and the naming, the restoration and the going in peace. I give both to the one who reaches. I give both. So hear me today. Hear me through 6 people whose stories have been preserved in Scripture, not only as historical accounts, but as living words addressed to the specific listener who needs them most in this specific moment. Through Hannah, I am saying, I remembered, at the appointed time, the time I had always known, the time that was mine to determine. I remembered what I had been holding for her. The barrenness did not define the future I had planned. The years of year after year did not tell the truth about what I was going to do. Pour out your soul. Receive the peace that comes before the answer. The face changes before the circumstances change. The Lord remembered Hannah, and the Lord remembers you. Whatever the specific form of your barrenness is, whatever the specific thing that has remained absent year after year, while others around you seem to receive what you have been waiting for, I have not forgotten. I have been holding it. Through Joseph, I am saying, the thread runs through the pit and the prison and the years of convenient forgetting. I am with you in the hard place, not only in the coat, but in the chains. The intention I have for your story is not abandonment. It is not punishment. It is preparation. The years between the dream and the throne are not wasted years. They are the years in which the character is formed that the throne requires. What you intended for harm, I intend for good. The thread is still there. Through every chapter that looked like it had severed it, I am holding it. Through Moses I am saying, the call does not expire in the wilderness. 40 years of shepherding did not void what I placed on Moses before the burning bush appeared. I have been hearing. I have been seeing. I know. And when I say now, I will be with you. Through Elijah, I am saying, the juniper tree is not the last chapter. If you have come through a season of great output and find yourself in a wilderness asking for the journey to be over, arise and eat. The care comes before the instruction. The provision comes before the redirection. Journey is too great for you. And I am saying that not as a rebuke, but as the most accurate acknowledgement of what you are carrying. And you are not alone. There are 7,000 who have not bowed the knee, and you do not know them yet, and I do. Get up and eat. The direction is coming. Through Simeon I am saying, hold the word. According to my word, that is how the promise is fulfilled. Not according to your timeline. Not according to what the tradition expects the fulfillment to look like. According to my word, in the form I chose. On the specific ordinary day when the Spirit says, go in. Today. Be present in the place I call you to. Watch for the leading. And when the moment arrives, when the poor couple walks in carrying the baby that looks like every other baby, because the Spirit who gave you the promise is the Spirit who will identify the fulfillment. Through the woman with the issue of blood, I am saying, reach. From behind if necessary. For the edge if that is all you can manage. Quietly if that is the only form available to you. Power goes out when you reach. The flow stops when you touch. Come forward and tell me the whole truth, and I will name you. Not by your condition, by your identity. You let go. I never did. I have been holding what is yours from the moment I spoke it, through every chapter, through every pit and prison and wilderness and broom tree and long ordinary day that was not yet the day. I have been holding it. The silence you have been living in is not the silence of absence. It is the silence of my holding, steady, unhurried, not contingent on your ability to keep believing in what I am carrying for you. My grip on what I have spoken over your life does not loosen when yours does. When Hannah released her grief into prayer, I was already holding Samuel. When Joseph was at the bottom of the empty cistern, I was already holding the thread that ran to Pharaoh's throne. When Moses was tending sheep in the wilderness of Midian, I was already preparing the morning of the burning bush. When Elijah was under the broom tree asking to die, I was already holding the still small voice and the instruction to go and the 7,000 who had not bowed. When Simeon woke up on the day that turned out to be the day, I was already holding the young couple from Galilee and the Spirit's leading, and the moment of the temple encounter. When the woman pressed through the crowd she should not have been in and reached for the hem from behind, I was already turning. I have been holding what you released. Every word I have spoken over your life remains in my hand. Every promise I have planted in you remains in my care. What I have started in your life, I complete. Not because you have maintained the faith required to hold it, but because I do not begin things I do not intend to finish. What looks like an abandoned promise is a held promise. What looks like an expired calling is a held calling. What looks like a dream that died in the pit is a thread that runs to the palace. What looks like a word given to an old man who has waited too long is a word that will be fulfilled on the specific ordinary day I have already chosen. You let go. I never did, and I am still holding everything I spoke over you. What I've spoken over your life has not expired. The promise still has your name on it. The calling still carries your voice. The dream I planted, the one you released, the one you set down in the dark because you could no longer sustain the cost of carrying it, is in my hand. And I am returning it to you today, not because you earned it back through sustained faith, not because you performed your way back into the position of receiving it, but because it always belonged to me, and the things that belong to me, and the things that belong to me do not expire, and the time for the returning has come. You let go. I held on. Hannah poured out her soul, and I remembered. Joseph was in the pit, and I held the thread to the throne. Moses fled into the wilderness for 40 years, and I was already planning the morning in the burning bush. Elijah asked to die under the broom tree, and I sent an angel with food in a still small voice. Simeon held the word for a lifetime, and I led him in on the specific day of its fulfillment. The woman reached from behind for the hem of my garment, and I turned. I have always turned. I have always held. I have always remembered. I will always hold what is mine, and what I have spoken over your life is mine. It came from me. It belongs to me, and from my hand it is being returned to you, in the appointed time, in the form I choose, on the day the Spirit leads you in. The bones are beginning to rattle. The bush is already burning on the far side of the wilderness. The thread is never broken. Amen. If something in this message named a promise you released, a dream you set down, a calling you stopped carrying, something you let go of in order to survive, type "I held on" in the comments below. Let those 3 words be your declaration that his grip did not slip when yours did. Type "I held on." And if this channel has been a place where God has spoken to you, subscribe. Click subscribe right now so that you do not miss the next message. A new word is here every week, and every message is for someone who needs it on that specific day. Subscribe and come back. I have more to say to you.